Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the people who also came to the opening a few weeks back. It was a really special evening, and I really appreciate all your support. I'm Angal Field. This is Baby Company. This is the second exhibition here. It's Company Gallery's new and more experimental space. Sophie is in the audience. She's the owner of Company Gallery in there and back. Elizabeth here is the director. Also wanted to thank Max and Annika and Ken and Margot and Brian, who also helped run Company Gallery. I'd like to introduce the panelists here. They are all friends of mine. This is Lia Clay. She's a very talented portrait photographer and commercial photographer. She shot for a lot of clients, has recently had work in Aperture, has had shows at Milk Gallery, in Candy, Teen Vogue, and I'm really excited to have another photographer in this space and to talk about images with you.
Same, baby.
This is Dylan Wardwell. She is also a very talented artist, recently graduated with a degree in art and is a model, recently signed, has been in places like Vogue, King Kong Magazine, Vivienne Westwood campaign, and on the cover of Violet Book, which is a really, in Violet Book, which is a big deal. Rachel Lipstein is a soccer teammate of mine, a very good soccer teammate, also a very talented writer and editor. They work for The New Yorker and recently had a really amazing piece about Man-Made, which is a documentary on trans bodybuilders, which I'm sure they'll be able to tell you more about. Shriya is, I would say, a Renaissance person, has been a writer and photographer for Rookie. We also attended school together and collaborated in the production and design of a raincoat. And we initially bonded over being insistent on making a raincoat that was gender neutral, as if raincoat should ever be anything else. But now Shriya is a data whiz at Supreme. Right.
And DJ for Fire.
And DJ for Fire, yes. Okay. I wanted to focus this discussion. There are a lot of things to talk about in talking about trans identity, non-binary identity, and culture, and visibility and representation. We could probably be here all night if we wanted to really discuss all of the issues surrounding that. But I wanted to center this a bit on image and image production. So I thought a great place to start would be to start discussing image in relation to social media, particularly in relation to things like Tumblr and Instagram and YouTube. That's in part where I feel like I came into my non-binary trans identity, where I saw others and wanted to emulate either their style or their body. And the more I spend with these platforms, the more I've also come to find community and critiques of it. And I think this is a really good jumping off point in speaking about trans and gender variant photographic history, particularly the way that trans and image has been often medicalized and become a kind of lurid fascination, especially in the way that these bodies have been inspected via photography. So I'd like to open up less of a question and more of just a jumping off point in discussing social media and image as a confluence of surveillance, identity, the construction of identity, community, and as an alternate archive.
I grew up in a small town in Indiana. It was primarily, it's very white because it's the Midwest. I'm lucky that I grew up in an Indian community, but I was the only alt Indian person, which was not easy. Angela and I have talked about this a lot, about how a lot of us find community on the internet, and I feel very thankful that I was exposed to websites like Flickr and Tumblr, LiveJournal, Xanga even, from the age of like 12 onwards, and definitely was able to like parse out why I felt different from my classmates by seeing other people online who were portraying themselves as, whether it was like queer sexually or like gender queer, because I didn't even know that gender fluidity was a thing until I moved here. But I remember seeing a picture of the model Agnes Dane in like a top hat and a button-down shirt and a tie, smoking a cigarette in black and white, and I posted it on my live journal, and I was like, this is everything, gotta wear a suit to prom. I didn't, which I really regret, but I did wear Nikes. And I feel like that was kind of the beginning of me understanding that there were identities out there beyond just cisgender. And like, while now I find I have a more tenuous relationship with the internet, which I feel like we can get into later, I think kind of everything started out for me with like finding other photographers and artists on Flickr, and then we all moved to Tumblr, and then we all moved to Instagram. Yeah.
I mean, like, I grew up out of the South and from North Carolina. Like, my presence of like being a trans woman was more of a survivalist mentality. It was like forcing yourself to be femme, and like honestly, like figuring out being like a butch trans woman is like the most confusing thing on the planet, because like you're like born like with all these attributes that are masculine, and like you like them, but at the same time it's like there's no other trans girls that were visible to me that were like butch. And so it was like one of those things where it's like I started hormones in North Carolina. I was like so like just dead set on being like femme and passing and like all these things, and like the representations when I started hormones was like Gigi Gorgeous or like that kind of thing, or like even Andrea Pejek. I mean, she's a beautiful, beautiful woman. It's like kind of like aesthetics is like damaging in those ways, because it's like you have to live up so much to like those aesthetics, I guess. But then like yeah, I mean like it took me a while, and like it took me like moving to New York and like kind of embracing like more queerness and more like representations of like trans women that like got me to the place where I felt comfortable as myself. And it's like a thing too, like I try and stay very centered with like I do identify like as like a binary trans woman. Like binary trans women can look like me. Like I do iterate that my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I don't like they, them, theirs, because it's like I think it's like helpful to be like, hey, like women can look like this and express themselves this way too. Yeah.
What you were saying called, I mean, there are two different things I'm thinking about, but I had said, I used to say and I used to think, and now I've kind of forgotten until we were just talking about this, but I read Stonebridge Blues like in 2016, that summer, and that was when, and afterward was really wrecked by that book, as you know, anyone might be, and everyone probably should be, but it felt very wrecked, and was starting to have conversations about it, and then gradually my Instagram Explore tab just became filled with like trans male top surgery and self-portraiture, like not every one of the 9, you know, spots in the Explore tab. And I was like confused why the algorithm was doing this for me. And then I gradually understood that the algorithm was tuned into something that I was myself thinking about, but had sort of had like a joke-ish that Instagram helped me realize I was trans, or told me I was trans, and then I agreed. And I've been curious like whether it's like at first I just thought it was that I saw one and then I kept looking because there was a curiosity that was driven by like internal desires, but now I'm thinking that it might have also just been listening to keywords in my conversations, which now it does. The other thing that when you were talking about Flickr, it reminded me of high school. We had a prom like photo group. We had a prom group for the dresses that people were going to wear to prom. I don't know if anyone experienced those. This is maybe a suburban public school sort of like phenomenon, but I posted my dress. The purpose was so that people didn't like duplicate dresses, and so like in advance of prom. and I posted mine, and it had, and I was extremely uncomfortable trying it on, and the whole thing was uncomfortable. But what else are you gonna do? And it was an empire waist, and the top was like tuxedo patterned. It was a little bow tie, and then red and white polka dots on the outside. And then a person under an alias, we think it was this guy Josh Gilbert, made comments on everyone's pictures. And the comment that he left on mine was, "Great, but what's your girlfriend gonna wear?" And it got me so hard, and he was dead right. But that was like obviously entangled in gender too, and like so much of formative image making and representation on the internet when you're like the only language you have for thinking about yourself is in terms of sexuality, which was what was available to me at the time, was wrapped up in gender presentation and tomboyery and those kinds of images. Like when you're pre-sexual or whatever, and you're not dating anyone, which was the case. How do you represent yourself in terms of gender? And so there were a lot of full warnings there.
I think with social media, I think about YouTube specifically and how important that was for me growing up in a small town, seeing that user-generated content, and specifically now working within fashion, I'm constantly put on sets where I don't have as much of a direction as say people making content on YouTube specifically, or and I think that pre-hormones and everything, YouTube was a way for me to access other people's experiences and blogs specifically as this sort of diary that gets shared, and I don't know, I feel I don't really know. Yeah, I think that
I'm curious, everyone has sort of spoken to how their earliest experiences maybe with social media, or how they began to see themselves through image. I'm curious how that has evolved. Shriya, you were sort of mentioning that you have a more tenuous relationship with social media now. I'd be curious to see how that's maybe shifted as people are not necessarily on linear, definitely not linear projections of becoming, but as we grow older or step into our queerness, I wonder how that shifted for people.
Yeah, I can definitely talk on that. I think I got Instagram maybe 2012, and at the time it just seemed like a more fun Facebook, because Facebook was just annoying and your mom's on it, and your mom's not on Instagram. And I definitely was like a lot of us, I started getting a lot of work because of Instagram, and I was like, this thing is great, really easy for me to post my work online, for a lot of people to see it, for people to find me, and then for me to get modeling gigs or photo gigs or writing or literally anything. And then in 2017 maybe, something just kind of flipped in my head, and I noticed that I was just constantly comparing my work to other people's, or photos of my body to other people's bodies, and it stopped being something where I was learning and growing and building a community, and became kind of this weapon where I was I had kind of created these sort of self-destructive tendencies that were sort of subconscious when I was on it. I'd post a photo that I really loved, and then 10 minutes later I'd be like, why do I feel awful? And it was because as soon as I posted a photo, I was just looking at everybody else's work, or I'd be waiting for people to like it, or why did I lose a follower? And it just making art turned into me analyzing myself in ways that weren't beneficial. And so I deleted it off my phone, stopped posting for a while, and now I kind of haven't really posted anything since last August, which feels good, but also sometimes I feel like I've been forgotten about, which is also real. And this happened to another friend of mine who like moved out of New York and was living in a different city for about a year, and she was just saying how like, and she wasn't really posting online, she was like, people forgot about me. Like people wouldn't text me to be like, hey, what's up, how are you? And I think that sort of like the internet plays this really crucial role in how we communicate with each other, how we learn about what's going on in other people's lives, but it also has like a very dark side to it. And at this point, I'm definitely trying to figure out like, how do I use this thing to my advantage, but also not let it like make my brain spin out of control. I also think it's different if you, like, depending on whether you're in school. Like when I was in school, it was really fun to use it because it was really low stakes, but after I graduated and saw everything as like a opportunity to capitalize off of something, that's when it like became a lot more dark. I also work full-time in an office, so like, whereas a lot of my counterparts have the time and mental energy to be like, okay, what am I posting today? What am I posting this week? I come home and I'm just like, I don't have that energy. And I used to feel badly about that. Now I realize that like, it's not worth it to feel bad about that. But yeah, I definitely am still trying to figure out like how I and other people can effectively use these platforms without like destroying ourselves in the meantime. Yeah.
I'm going through like similar like iterations of that too. I mean like right now I feel like social media is like really damaging to like me and like my version of queerness too. It's like just I work with like commercial photography a lot, and just like the gatekeepers of that are like commodifying like queerness and transness in a way that's like this really, really intense aesthetic. It's like these things where it's like, it's only this variation of like transness of queerness, it's like making sense to people, you know? Like, and I mean, it's like people in this room too, like we all are a part of that, and it's like something that like I'm trying to get like accountability for, kind of like figure out how I feel about that. And it's like, I have conversations where it's like, well, maybe I'll take it away from like posting on like my feed, so like the level of likes isn't so like judged, and like just use stories, because that way I see how much reception something's getting. And it's like, I'll take a photograph of something that I care about so much, and it's like something that you all should care about, and like no one cares.
Right.
Like that's a problem. And it's not just like us, it's the algorithm too. It's like having to deal with the fact that like, you know, I was just talking about this, like it prioritizes like cell phone pictures of like people, like selfies, like essentially that, and then like everything else gets kind of like discarded in this way that's just like very hurtful. And it's like, and I've definitely had like some scars from social media, like, and the things that do get like attention, it's just like heartbreaking sometimes, you know, like, and you're like, how many iterations of this can we like actually accept? And like, I don't know, yeah, I'm in a weird cold state. That's like informative of me too, like it's always this thing where I have variations of like, oh, I have to be this type of person, or I have to be like this cool or this interesting, or like I have to like be this pretty, and like I have to like follow this guided aesthetic just to like make my work matter, which is awful. So like, I don't know. But like at the same time, like I wouldn't be sitting here without it either. Like there's been so much freedom in it too, so it's like just a double-sided thing. Yeah. Twisted sister.
I feel that thing about like being forgotten, like in a separate way. Like I don't really post any of my art on social media because I'm afraid that like specifically because I make sculptures mostly, I'm afraid that it's gonna like not be looked at in the way that I want it to be, or it's obviously two-dimensional and you're like scrolling rather than like having it in the expanded field in a way. But also I just feel like people forget that I make art, and that's like, I feel like your identity is reduced to what you put on Instagram rather than like what you're actually doing daily. So it like really brings me out that way for sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering how, maybe this can be a nice segue into talking about fashion and clothing and, like you were saying, selfies, the way we have come to represent ourselves. If Instagram helps curate a sort of self that you're expected to be, whether, Dylan, if you're just expected to be sort of a model and you can't simultaneously be an artist. I wonder, moving away from that, but speaking to that, how fashion plays a role with image and Instagram and the way that you construct an identity.
I don't know, it's like, it's two-sided too. Like, I love a fashion image, I love working in fashion. Like, there's images I take that I'm like, oh my god, this is so major, I like love this to pieces, you know, like, But like at the same time, it's like within myself, like I feel sometimes trapped in like the butch identity I've created for myself, because like in this industry you're expected to be one thing, you're expected to be like digestible in one way, like you're expected like, and like I go back to the South and it's like I fall back into like a femme narrative because it's like a survivalist thing, but like visiting home for the holidays, this is where my thoughts have been. But at the same time, it's like I feel scared to be femme here because it's like that's not is what is expected of me. Like people have gotten to know me because of I'm a butch trans woman, you know, like. And it's like one of those things where it's like I get off the plane, I wipe the makeup off, I put the fucking Blundstones on, you know, like how many people here are wearing Blundstones? Like, yeah, like, but I don't know. It's like it's a thing where like I feel like it traps me in a way too, where it's like I can't be expressive with like my feminist as well. I don't know, but like also like yeah, like finding other iterations of yourself and like finding things that are beautiful and like well crafted and like. I don't know, I'm just, with identity politics, I think the biggest like motivation in my work and fashion is like moving away from it and like having expectations of transness that isn't like reliant on transness, like just having like people be involved in ways that isn't relying on identities all the time.
So maybe we'll leave the discussion of fashion and clothing,
yeah.
and go off of what you're saying, Leah, about moving beyond image. Like, what does it look like to strategize ways for trans and gender non-conforming people to exist outside of image?
I can talk more about this, I guess. Like, I mean, and that's the other problem too. It's like an image only does so much. I mean, an image could do a lot, but it can't do everything. It's like, and we've become like really reliant on images, and like we kind of forget. Like I'm always like adamant that like I don't really want to appear in front of the camera. Like it's important to be trans behind the camera too. Like it's important to have people in your everyday life that are queer or trans. Like you say, like we need to have like a varied conversation about like always relying on the image to be our allies. Like the image doesn't need to be the ally all the time. And like there's so many people who think like, oh, I was a part of this image. I like, especially editors. It's like, oh, we made like this image together. We're allies now. And I'm like, no, that doesn't give you a grant to be an ally. Like you're not actively participating outside of the image kind of thing. And it's just like not enough to make an image about something anymore. Like it does solve some things, but I've kind of gotten to the point where it's like, I work in commercial photography because it's a quicker way to mass media. Like in New York, I feel like a lot of things like New York centric, and we think about New York, we think about LA, and we kind of miss the gap of like everything in the middle. And it's like people aren't going to see like something that like you're creating for two sides of the country. You know, like people like see like the picture of Caitlyn Jenner, and like that's informative of like how they digest trans women entirely. And like as like helpful as that cover was, is also damaging. It's like now we're all expected to look like that. You know, like, and that's like something where I always get in like my head about it, where it's like yes, I want to be an artist, yes, I want my work to be precious, yes, I want to do things that are like in that world, but it's a niche and it exists for a niche of people who like are digesting that. The people who like actually like out there that we need to change the minds of don't get that reception. So
I was going to say, so I mean, I think sort of related to that, like, this is going to sound banal and kind of obvious, but like images, I mean, images can obviously be valuable and can like create imaginative spaces that were not previously visible in our own imaginations, but then they can also like circumscribe and limit what in representing it, you know, it forecloses everything else that it's not representing, obviously. But I emailed you a little, I've been thinking a lot about sci-fi, gender queer literatures and like trans themes in sci-fi, and reading Simon Delaney and Triton and Ursula Le Guin, The Dispossessed, and like the ways that trans narratives and trans people are able to be produced in literature and in text, leaving that field open to the imagination, being a kind of for lack of a better word, radical project, and the like inability in filmic adaptations to, you know, adapt that to screen because it necessarily projects a single person or many people who have no necessary connection to what your image of that is, how limited like a visual adaptation can be, but at the same time, you know, seeing like selfie portraiture in social media is like very powerful in terms of being able to ideate possibilities for myself and I'm sure for others, while at the same time they create a mandate implicitly for you to produce images that are in relation to those kinds of images. And like when you take a photograph of yourself, there's a genre of images that you've seen that you judge against, which can be kind of obviously limited. So it's a little incoherent, but those are my general thoughts.
Can you read the prompt again? Sorry, I just forgot the phrasing.
I guess I was trying to discuss other forms of play or ways to strategize moving beyond the image. I think, Rach, I think language operates in a really similar way in that, say the camera sets what Craig Owens calls setting subjects at a distance and maintaining the distance. That's the violence of the frame. That's the violence of the camera and often the violence of image. And anybody who picks up a camera, whether it be a selfie, can't really escape those terms in that it seeks to represent and identify and fix a subject in an identity, whether it be a trans or cis identity. And I think language operates in a similar, maybe more deceitful way, and then also seeks to, logos, identify and claim and name something. So I guess I'm just interested in, you were thinking about other things that can't be visualized but can be articulated, or sci-fi as a realm of sort of exiting the violence of reality. Yeah, but I guess I just wonder if there's equivalent to that, besides linguistic play, if there's equivalent to that in image.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that literature writing is the escape of utopia, because I think it can be the reverse. It just so happens that they generated themselves those ideas there, so they get to be the promulgators and have authority over it. But in writing about a documentary, for just to be gauche for a second and talk about something I just did, it was so difficult to just describe scenes that were perfectly well done. They didn't need me to describe them, except that was my task, and I couldn't just put together a supercut and put that on the website, because that you have to write about it, and that felt violent, and I was just so guilty and nervous and sweating full body the entire time, and then for the entire time afterward until now, it never ends, and because that you're it's someone would say Susan Sontag would say photography has a claim on being neutral and documentary, where literature is necessary, is clearly someone's interpretation of things, but it cuts both ways.
I think a lot of the reframing for me has to do with meeting people outside of who we just see in media when we think of queer and trans people, when we think of people of color, women of color, and going to poetry readings where I know it's going to be predominantly POC or predominantly queer, and then getting to talk one-on-one to people about their experiences and kind of taking things off the internet and back into real life, whether that means being in a room of people like this or being one-on-one with somebody. I love to email. I love sending long-ass emails, and I think opening up the conversation so that it allows us to talk about things beyond just what a photograph can do. I also like that. All of that being said, there have been so many times where a photograph for me has made me feel human or whole or proud of myself, whether it's a photograph somebody took of me or something that I made of someone or something. And I think a lot of people kind of use photography or art as a way to cope with whatever's happening. And I think that that can also be a double-edged sword. Like, there have been, you know, periods of life that have been really difficult, but at the end of it, if I'm like, well, I made this really great photograph where I wrote all these poems, it kind of like seems like it was worth it in a way. But I also think that you can repress your feelings and your experiences by just focusing on making something and not actually figuring out why you feel that way and whether it's positive or negative. Yeah. But I think like taking things kind of offline and back in person and having conversations is an important step.
I feel like a lot of images too, especially with like trans people, is relying on trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a huge thing. It's like, I mean, there's so many things that I've done in my work that have been like, just requiring me to talk about trauma that like, it's very personal. It's something that like, I don't want to talk to you guys about that. Like it's something that I feel like I'm working through, you know, like, it's one of those things too where it's like, it's when like cis people shouldn't be making work exclusively about trans people, like, because it's so demanding of trans people to have trauma to make it interesting. And like, that's fucked up, like, you know, like, I don't know. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'm trying to figure out how to erase that narrative from it and how to like, take a step back and be inclusive, but at the same time not requiring trauma to like, make work for people, I don't know.
Me and my friend Jenny, who's a woman of color, were just talking about this a couple weeks ago, how like we never get to talk about like floofy things that don't matter the way that a lot of cis white women get to. And like we want to talk about our zodiac signs and like what we eat for lunch, but nobody ever wants to know about that. They just want to know about like, you know, how do you navigate the world as this and that. And I think like a lot of the time, yeah, like in my office, for example, I don't talk to people about the fact that I identify as non-binary. I'm comfortable with them using she pronouns for me because that's just like a step that I'm not ready to take. And like one of my coworkers knows that I identify as non-binary, and she often goes out of her way to like not use any pronoun for me in the office, which is an interesting game. But a lot of the time I'm like, I just don't want to have to talk about this because why? It's just me and my body. Like, this has nothing to do with you. You know?
Tired.
Yeah, right, I'm tired.
I don't know, and it's so limiting too. It's like you just expect trans people to be trans, and like that's it, you know. Like I don't know, and like it's like I'm getting stubborn about it. It's like in my own work, it's like I want to be able to do the same thing that like all the cis gays are doing. Like I want to shoot like a cover of something and like it not be about me and my identity politics, you know. Like, and I get that some things need to be about that. Like that's how we're moving forward. I mean, and we're in this weird transitional kind of phase of like like figuring it out, and we're all figuring it out together. But at the same time, like, god damn, leave me alone some days, you know. Like I don't know. Yeah, that's my feelings. It's weird too, like what doors I can't get into because of like diversity. Like it's like one of those things where it's like I get typecast as a diversity cast like all the time. It's like, oh, she does a story about diversity, but then it's like the cooler aspects of like this world like don't pay attention to me because of that. It's like, oh, you're just like a diversity cast. Like we're not gonna like take you seriously. Like it's like I don't get these like I only get called up for New York Times and it's like a trans story, but then like everything else, it's like, no, you just like have the same boring photographer doing the same shit. Like, I don't know. Yeah, and delineates like talent too. Like, to be known as a talented photographer, not just a trans woman who took a picture. Like.
I guess I've definitely noticed my relationship with social media in particular to be one of like increased exposure to, I would say, like gender trauma. The more I cultivate a trans community online, the more I see like the struggles of my friends. And I think it's really tough to be stuck in that space of both like needing it to be discussed and understood and shared. Like I'm thinking in particular about like crowdfunding being shared on social media as this really sort of radical grassroots movement of anti-capitalist care, essentially, of dispersing funds to friends and getting your other friends to do so, but also being caught in this experience of reading about other people's pain or reliving your own in the process. And I think the same happens for violent images we've seen about like Black Lives Matter movement and trans women who've been killed and stuff. So it's hard to be, it's like you're complicit either way, and also complicit if you choose to ignore it or feel like you can't see any more of that, right? Like that's also too easy of an outcome.
It's messy too, because it's like on that same like double-sided thing. Like on the same page, I have like agents telling me, "Oh, you need to stop doing these trans stories because like you're not going to be taken seriously if you keep doing them." And like then there's a conversation of like, well, why is that the answer? You know, like why do I have to stop being something that I am to like matter to people? Like, and like that's the thing too. Like it's just like that's the biggest thing I have to talk about is like regaining control for myself and being able to make these stories for myself in a way that isn't like commodified, isn't capitalized, is like more of a grassroots kind of thing where it's like you do it for yourself, not for other people. And like I don't know, it's very tricky. There's so many like just moments where I'm like, God, this is impossible. Like I don't know how to climb this mountain. No.
What makes it feel doable?
Community.
And what does that look like? I guess that goes back to what my earlier sort of proposition of like dress or nightlife, like just the sort of rich history of dressing up, of queer nightlife, of drag, and all these ways that dress plays into performance and community. I'd be curious to hear more about the ways that you all cultivate community offline and moments of identification and feeling legible.
A lot of the time it's like the statement of like, well, someone's gotta fucking do it, like, and that gets through, I guess, too. And like, yeah, it's like, it's a dying thing too. Like, I just photographed Victoria Cruz, which you should all know about, and she's like, she's one of like the people who kept the legacy of Marsha P. Johnson alive, and it's like, no one knows about her, no one cares about her, like, you know, kind of thing. And like, we should all be responsible for that kind of thing too. Like, you need to understand where you came from. Like, and it's like, that's the thing too, where I talk about like Instagram and like it mattering. It's like, I took this portrait of her, but like, I am resilient to post it because I am scared that nobody will care. And like, it's more heartbreaking to like, put it out there than it is to just like keep it for myself, you know? It's like always having to battle that way, I guess. But, yeah.
I think it's also hard when you're like a working photographer and everything is about like booking the next gig and getting paid on time, that it's hard to keep things for yourself.
Yeah.
And like now that I am not relying on the internet to make work because I work in an office and get paid, I've found that I've like been able to kind of have a better relationship with the work I make because I am able to kind of keep things for myself or like marinate on things, but it's way, way harder when you're like, I made this thing, I need to put it out so people can see that I saw it, so that I can get the next gig, and so that the client is also happy that I posted the thing, because a lot of us are often mandated to, or like, it's like the end game is Instagram instead of like the portrait that you made, the publication that it's for, or like, you know, physical prints in an actual room. I think that's what I was getting frustrated with. I was like, I didn't make these pictures to post them on a tiny little square where for people to look at it for 15, not even 15 seconds, 1 second?
And that's all that matters.
0.1 seconds? Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also like hard to separate yourself from the work that you're making, and like sometimes things feel too precious to put out there because it really like feels like a piece of yourself.
I mean, like, bless you all for coming to see things on the wall, because like that's where it's at, you know. I don't know.
And physically in real life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like, to what you were saying about the like GoFundMe's, you know, I see, like, we met through Instagram, arguably, before soccer, and I mean, there are people I've met and or stay in touch with now that they've moved away that I would not otherwise be able to, because we don't have like a binary communication relationship. But like, I'll be one of the people, like, you know, you can communicate like a mass email, like a post, and people can, post. It dovetails with the images. They go with long captions sometimes, and like everyone has different relationships to what their captions are. This is so in the weeds of Instagram, but like I mean, as far as building community goes, whether it's online or offline, the through line is like earnestness, I think. Even though I don't have the capacity anymore to post a long, earnest caption, I really like appreciate the ones that I see, and those are, I mean, it's like storytelling, and whether or not, and whatever like fucked up metrics you internalize based on people's responses, I think the people who persist in doing it, hopefully know that they're reaching people.
Any other offline experiences of community besides soccer?
I went to a really fun party the other day at my distant cousin's house. My brother and I went to this wedding of another distant cousin like a couple years ago and met this girl. Basically all Indian people are related. And we met this really fun girl who's a few years older than me, and she speaks the same language as me, or the like other language that I speak besides English. And I went to a party at her apartment, and it was just like 30 Indian people, but they all speak like my mother tongue, but they all speak it the same way I do, which is like with an American accent and half in English. And then it turned out that like half the people there were queer, and since I never grew up around like queer people of color, it felt so foreign, but also like I felt very at home, and it was really nice to be able to have that like in-person experience for like 4 hours sitting in this person's house just talking about whatever, like not having to code switch, being able to speak in my native tongue and English back and forth, being able to like make jokes about her parents or grandparents, and being able to understand what everybody was talking about. And also recognizing that a lot of us have had to like suppress our identities to our families and our extended families because they either don't have an understanding, are bigoted, don't agree with it, or we're just afraid because we don't know what will happen. But it was very comforting to be in a space like that. And this year I am definitely trying to be in more spaces like that, like making the active, like texting someone and being like, what are you doing this weekend? And like making more definitive plans instead of just being like, I hope to see you around, and then never seeing anyone. Because I know how much I benefit from being in a space where I don't have to explain myself. Yeah.
I'm curious for people who've been on the other side of the camera. You were saying you have, Dylan, I definitely know you have, and Shriya as well. How have you navigated being both like true to yourself, and then also like what's expected of you as a performer or as a model behind the camera?
For me, it's been a self-timer because I don't let anyone else take a picture of me. I mean, rarely. There's the photographer I just photographed me, and like I love her work. And Navy Graham should also know her. She's lovely. But yeah, like in the beginning, it was like so focused on me and my transness and all that shit. And like it's a starting point. It's like something I had to like grapple with daily. But like I mean, like I've been on like not even like photos, but like interviews where it's like I've literally had the byline of what makeup brands made you feel like a woman, and like what clothing did you wear to make yourself feel more feminine, and it's like no to that shit.
It's like blend service.
Yeah, exactly. God, Century 21. No. But yeah, no, I now it's like I have to be so in control of like who gets to take a picture of me and everything. I don't know, but I'm also not a model. So.
I think staying true to myself would just be like saying no to a lot of jobs in a similar way. I just feel like that's the way that I feel most happy. It's just like when I say no to things that I don't feel comfortable doing. It's just like so simple. And once I realize that I don't know, I feel like as a model I feel replaceable a lot of times, and specifically with like corporations, I feel like if I don't take a job, it's not really gonna hurt the corporation in any way. But like, I constantly have to remind myself that I'm not replaceable and like, that I can say no to things and just, if only for my own like mental health and well-being. That's like,
I think for me, like, if I'm having my photo taken, it's usually by somebody who doesn't identify as a cis male, and so usually there's just kind of like more of a level of comfort. Yeah, but I think it's also hard when like a lot of people don't really know what non-binary identity is. Like they have a better, like people in kind of like on set who are not queer or queer adjacent have like a very binary understanding of gender, obviously, and a binary understanding of like transness or people who don't identify as cis. And I just remember like being afraid to be on set with like hairy legs, but also like seeming like a girl, sounding like a girl, but then like kind of looking like a boy, and like what would people say? They don't say anything, at least not to your face, if they're nice. If they're not nice, then they don't matter. But yeah, I think saying no, knowing what you're comfortable with, only allowing a select number of people to take your photograph, like who you feel comfortable with. But I also like sometimes feel like a rock star when I get my picture taken, even if it's by somebody I don't know, because it just like I get this like boost of adrenaline and confidence that I just wish I had when I was like between the ages of 12 and 17. And I spent a lot of time taking self-portraits in high school, just as a way to like understand what I looked like and how I wanted to look, and like went through a series of haircuts like a lot of us probably have. But yeah, I like getting like one solid picture of myself taken every year because it's something nice to reflect back on when I'm like feeling kind of in the dumps, where I look at a picture of myself and I'm like, you look good, don't worry about it, you're fine.
That makes me think of Rach. Rach sent me an article written by the New York Times recently about stock photography as it relates to gender, queer, and trans people. I don't know if anyone else has read this, but it essentially said that the most popular trans image in stock photography was not a person at all, but just the symbol, like someone with their face half cropped out and just holding like a placard with a gender equality or trans symbol or whatnot, which we were sort of going back and forth and saying that there are a lot of reasons that that's sort of bizarre. Part of it is that the second most shared or viral image with regards to genderqueer is people only against flat backgrounds, like a white wall or something, as trans or as genderqueer, whereas in other stock photography, like a woman would be placed against
Eating a salad.
eating a salad. What was it? It was like hiking, like women
Yeah.
are hiking or something. Nature, of course, coded nature. And then for a man,
Which is kind of progressive.
depends on how one likes
Really missed that one, sorry.
But we were just texting about it today, but and then man would be like at an office in productivity, and that has just made me think about like, we actually don't know what genderqueer looks like. We don't really know how to image it because it's not one thing and it's not a fixed stable thing, and so to even think that like there's sort of like one, that genderqueer has a particular optic to it is fascinating, and I think by representing or by imaging often that, and showing the variation of it works to unravel that, or a preset notion of what it might look like.
Yeah, I think, well, the other weird thing that struck me, just to dig in a little deeper on this New York Times article and how much I didn't like it, I want to see authors here, and then I'll stop. But it weirdly had this like assumption that it was a sign of, they were doing the roundup of like, we're really progressive because we're actually critiquing this phenomenon of stock photography, the most purchased stock. The idea that like consumer habits of corporations that use stock photographs are in any way like indicative of social acceptance or trends was like a kind of dubious premise to me. And then the assumption that like it's more accepting or more tolerant for more, I mean, like, it goes on with what you're saying, Leah, that, like, is it better is it more accepting to show a non-binary person, like, doing an activity? Or the assumption was that it's, like, reductive of their identity to show them just against a flat background, just, like, with their face. But to me, that seemed to say more about the viewer, like, that's what they see in it. They see the isolated, like, identity of that person as non-binary. But, like, there's tons of portraiture that's, like, just a person. And I think, I mean, it just seemed to speak more of it. It seemed like a projection of their prejudice, and then them attempting to, like, extrapolate some sort of argument about general tolerance from something that seems like, you know, like, that's also just, like, born of a capitalist mandate to show people working and doing activities, and that's, like, that shows that they have, like, different expectations for, that they aren't seeing men as just men or whatever. That was kind of my point.
It kind of reminds me of this project I had at the Women's March. I was doing a project for ID, and essentially they wanted me to document other trans people at the march and, like, that representation. And I was working with a group. There was, like, a set amount of people that, like, I was supposed to photograph. It was, like, all, like, written on emails. If you went to the Women's March, trying to find someone in that crowd was absolutely impossible. And so I emailed the editor during the march, and she wrote back with the, like, notion of, oh, just go find some trans people and photograph them. And it's like getting in the headspace of going up to people you don't know and being like, oh, you're trans, and decoding that for them, and being like, I'm gonna take a picture of you because I'm doing this thing for this. It's just like the notion of, like, what does that look like? Who, like, where do I have to go up to people I don't know and, like, assume they're trans, or assume their identities, or assume, like, what they look like, you know, like, and how they present, you know, like. And I, like, wrote back and I was like, no, I'm not doing this, you know, like, I think I said something notion of, like, I don't think that's possible. I think I'm gonna have to cancel this, and, like, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. It like brings up the whole like field of, like, legibility and, like, who, you know, who's having to read that and what assumptions you have to make when you, like to ask strangers, I can't imagine. But even in, like, stock photographs, like, who's deemed legible enough to make a point for, like, you know, selling a power drill or something.
I'd like to open up the conversation to all of you. Would anybody like to ask any questions or offer up any thoughts?
You can ask personal questions.
Sure.
And ask questions not related to gender.
Yeah.
So going back to, like, stock photography and kind of not having representation there, do you think it would benefit the gender community to have more representation there if there were more photographers pushing that kind of photography into that, like, you know, pool of images that people are trying to source? Because I feel like it's very skewed in the sense that, like, you know, you have this platform where people are just uploading generic photos of people doing things, so they can, you know, use it for whatever medium they need. But if there was this, like, supply of imagery that was created, do you think that would better tell a more colorful story, I guess?
It's tricky because neither you nor I want to be a stock photographer.
Can we expand it outside of stock, just imagery in general?
I don't believe that imagery or trans imagery that more representation will save people's lives. I don't think that images of trans people produce safe working environments, produce community, produce, like, IRL community, so to speak, or stop the violence that's happening on streets, the harassment on subway platforms. And I don't think that, like, more representation will lead to that. But that said, like, I still believe in the power of photography and the ability to see and recognize subjects and identify with them and find identity out of that. I don't know if I would locate stock photography or the proliferation of visibility or images as a point of access for that.
It's like, I mean, like, that's the thing too, and like, this is a little self-promotional statement, but it's like, I don't think me taking a picture of other trans people is radical anymore. I think me working as a trans person in an industry that's oversaturated with mostly cis men taking images is radical. Like, it's like, you need to start hiring us, you need to start actually like building the steps for us to get to the same places that you've been allotted. Like, an image isn't enough anymore, and yeah, I'm tired of people always like using it as a placeholder for that.
And the idea of like theoretically yes, I think like it can't like the thinking could be like it can't hurt. Like of course it won't solve like systemic issues. It's not a policy platform, but like there is like a predominant narrative that like more visibility, the more visibility the better, and then it's value neutral. And I don't like know that it is. Obviously in stock photography, like archives of images, generic images of random people, like that kind of like it like calls to mind like you know kinds of surveillance and kinds of like archive building that you know is going into like facial recognition technology and like you know the there's just like a tinkling in the back of my mind that isn't like co-ed necessarily. That's just like there are harms and there are risks always to being visible, and that's just like one like example of how like an archive could be used to nefarious ends when you like upload a selfie of you to see which 17th century you know painting you look most like. That's like there are potential harms even as like maybe there will be a lot of genderqueer people in the like facial recognition technology archive that Samsung owns, and that could like you know in like big capitalism that's really progressive, but it's scary too obviously.
Kind of going off what Leah was saying, I feel like what Angela was saying about it's not the photograph that necessarily accomplishes anything, but in my experience it's been like actually being with somebody for an hour or two and sitting down, and while you're photographing them you're having a conversation, and it's basically like a therapy session where you get to unload everything and learn something about yourself and about the subject. And I discovered that in 2017 when I started like proactively seeking out gender nonconforming people of color to photograph as an attempt to increase representation. That was my like initial thought, like we need more black and brown gender nonconforming people out there, like photos for other people to see. And then slowly I realized as I was taking these photographs that it actually, like the photographs were almost inconsequential. Like it was more about reaching out to someone, them feeling like not flattered, but just like pleased that somebody would hit them up and be like, hey, do you want to spend an hour? I'd love to take your photograph. And then having a discussion, and then both parties leaving just feeling like better about being alive. And then if I didn't develop the film, it was almost kind of like, that's fine, because it was never really about having a picture. It was more about like having the experience of like feeling necessary and whole and confident and good about yourself, and less about like having a thing to look at later. I know that kind of contradicts what I was saying before, but I think that like, you know, both the like the journey and the end point have value. Yeah.
And it's control.
It's the
too.
climb, as Mike says.
It's a climb. No, but I think it's control too, because it's like, I think cis men photographing trans people are inherently voyeuristic. It's like the updated version of the peeping Tom, and like they're going to photograph trans people in a way that heightens their transness. Mm-hmm. And I feel like people, like for me, photographing trans people, I'm not doing that. I'm trying to photograph them as a person and as like someone that I like understand as well. And like there is comfort in that too. Like, I don't know how many times I've been on set with other trans people, and it's been like it's just like a let go of like a lot of frustration they have with being photographed too. Like, and like it's kind of funny because when I photograph those people now, it's like I have to find something to make them interesting. It's like I'm looking for qualities in them, and I'm like, okay, we've got to do something. But they, you know, like, but yeah, no, it's just I don't know, control. Like, who is making the images, and there's a huge responsibility in that too. It's like, we do judge ourselves based on the images that are out there.
I'd like to get back to what you two were saying. I just finished reading Trapdoor by Tourmaline Gosset. I don't know if any of you have read that. It's put out by the New Museum. Joanna Burton, the curator at the New Museum, edited it. It's really an incredible read. Tourmaline talks a lot about, there are various essays on the trap of visibility, and I think that she definitely comes out on the side that more visibility does not equal like better lives for trans people, that there's actually so much evidence that suggests that more visibility equals more violence, more backlash. Like the more we see trans women on the covers of magazines, the less like people in the everyday life are able to negotiate that, and it ends up being that violence is like taken out on trans people that they know because they're not able to access these rising figures in popular culture in the mainstream. So I think so much evidence actually suggests that like visibility has led to increase in violence and deaths. But I would say like in my photographic practice, Shriya, like I feel that too is the most redemptive thing about photographing. Even if I have a really complicated relationship with that medium, I've made really good friends by reaching out to people who are my subjects and then become friends, or and have expanded my community in that way, which has been really far more than like an image has ever alone has given me. Yeah.
No, it's the darkest fucking thought to think like, if this all goes tits up with like where we're at and like our environment, like I have been so visible as a trans person, like and the people that I've photographed, like what if that becomes the target, you know, like what if that becomes the like, how do you escape that visibility if like the worst comes true, like if we start actually legislating against like trans people in a way that's like putting them in camps or something like that, you know, like if the violence does continue, like, yeah, I don't know. That's the scariest thought I have. And it's like the thing too where it's like, it seems like sci-fi, but sometimes it's not. I don't know. Speaking of sci-fi.
Speaking of sci-fi. Well, and it's not too, I don't think like we've solved in any way the issue of, not just in terms of images, but like in terms of like rights battles that, you know, after like Supreme Court cases come out, there's upticks in violence, like that you know, whenever that with visibility can come violence, and visibility that's created like kind of unilaterally, if that makes sense, that comes out either top down from like some sort of legislative regime or from an activist effort or whatever, you know, like any putting out there, if it's, I don't know the solution other than like sort of infinite like reaches to education, you know, notions of education or like broader, you know, like revolution, you know, that vision of capitalism.
Yeah, I think the rights-based movement, which has been like the neoliberal promise of, you know, gay marriage or even like in thinking about bathrooms as like a rights-based achievement or drive, has also rendered it so that the way to combat that is also through anti-trans and anti-queer legislation as well. So I think we need to start thinking about other models of configuring like trans vitality and community that are not driven by this obsession with rights per se.
I have a question, maybe this is general, and I kind of came late. I'm like struck by the conversations around identification with subject matter and with subjects, and I'm wondering what the space in general is for disidentification, and also maybe even the reverse of the therapeutic space between the subject and the photographer for the non-therapeutic space, i.e. the kind of like much more depersonalized way in which photographers often do work, both with the world and also with individual subjects. I'm just curious how that factors into sort of, I guess, the the general experience that we're kind of talking about now, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that.
What is disidentification?
Well, like, I guess it's like, I was struck by talking about getting, like, knowing the subject well, and I'm curious about not knowing the subject, or if that matters too. If like what you don't know about someone, or the distance between you and someone is as important, or has a different, like, how close do you have to be to someone to photograph them?
Well, just to clarify disidentification, I understand it as the liminal space, like the trap between needing to relate to how you're identified, and also like the mechanisms of pushing back against that identification. So like how I perform being non-binary or being configured within trans, and then also wanting to undercut the ways I'm boxed into that. Is that what you mean by the...
I guess, I mean, that makes sense in terms of this. I guess I mean more, I'm trying to think about the ways in which photography can have a kind of depersonalized element, you know, which seems to maybe set up a kind of tension between, like, the situation you were describing where you said you became quite close with someone and it felt, you described it as a kind of therapy. And so I'm wondering, like, how important that therapeutic element is to it, or if there's another kind of photography or an adjacent photography, or if it's related, where it has no therapeutic aspect. I'm just curious about that experience, or what, or if that matters more, like what that level.
I work commercially a lot, and like a lot of the subject matters that I show up to, I have no real connection with. And like, I mean, there's tools in place that I definitely have as a photographer to like kind of use that space, and like mostly it's just being the most ridiculous version of myself, being like, yes, oh my god, I love that, like, you know, like people who know me personally, people who see me on set realize there's two different people in the room, like, and this person goes out and this person comes in, and there's always something there. Like, I've always walked away with something, even like not knowing anybody and having an experience with someone where it's like connective in a way, and like there's so many ways in which like I have to be conscious of what I'm doing and how I'm saying, like my expressions on my face, because if I don't like something, it's like you can't be that visible, like you have to just keep going, like, and I do a lot of work for work and not for myself or my like body of work essentially. I mean, like, I just photographed Sabrina Carpenter, who is like a 17-year-old with 15 million followers, you know, like, I don't know who she is, but at the same time, like, I don't care who she is, that's the problem. But like, just having her show up and having to like have this like limited amount of time to get the photograph that I needed to get to make the job happen. And like, just, yeah, you go with it. I mean, there's a lot of times when it's like, and there's like, it's bad to say, but like reliance on like cliches a little bit. Like, I just photographed Fran Lebowitz, and like, you know, like I don't know her personally, I'm not gonna know her personally, and like having to rely on these like notes that I have. And it's like, I do a lot of research usually before I photograph someone I don't know, and it's like I try and become aware of like what's capable of them too. Like, I don't know, like I knew Fran Lebowitz would like smoke a cigarette and talk a lot, so I took a picture of her smoking a cigarette and talking a lot. Like, I don't know, but those experiences matter too. They're personal, like they're, I don't know. Yeah, photography is inherently intimate in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The people who are responsible in a way that's like good don't use it to be a voyeur, they use it as a communication tool in the middle of the table. So.
I think it's hard to cut the personal out of it. I think like even like, I'm sure a lot of your commercial work, it is like, it's a job, you get in, you make the work and you get out, but like with what you're saying, you research beforehand, like if you're photographing a live subject, like not a product shot or a landscape or something, like you can't avoid communicating with the person, even if you don't speak the same language, because so much of it is about how you hold your body, how you respond to them, or like, yeah, complimenting them or becoming a caricature of yourself to make them feel more comfortable. Like, I think all of that is kind of unavoidable.
Going back to Sabrina Carpenter, she's from Philadelphia, and I lived there for a year and a half. We talked about this vegan pizza place for like 10 minutes. Like, yeah, Blackbird, yes! Oh my god, it's so good.
It's so good.
I'm not even vegan, and it's like, I'm obsessed, like.
Oh no. I think it's been said. It's like, yeah, I think just like, yeah, being on set regardless is always going to be like personal, and even if it's not healing, like I feel like I'll oftentimes leave after having gotten in some sort of like strange contention with someone on set, feeling that I would hope that they've like changed a little bit from it, having never been like exposed to someone who looks like me, or like been around someone who looks like me, and I feel like, yeah, like we need to work together sets. Yeah, I don't know, I think like regardless of whether or not it's appealing, I've definitely been on a lot of sets that are like not at all that, but I think that it's still like work that's being done and like, I don't know.
Also catering.
Yeah.
That's the biggest like icebreaker.
Oh, the food?
The food,
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. There's food there, people are so nice. Like, no. Does that answer your question? Cool.
We were talking about disidentification in like a theoretical sense before this.
And in a therapeutic sense too.
Yeah, but I mean like I was just reading an essay on performing disidentification without getting too theory, but like, you know, it can be a coping strategy too, and you like, my understanding of it is kind of like in a response to toxic imagery or like pervasive negative stereotyped images of, you know, like in Fun Home, which I, you know, got probably a baseline familiarity with, like the moment where the Alison Bechdel character is really young and sees like the butch like truck driving lesbian in the diner with her dad and performs this identification and like it's like this isn't me but this is me and like but this representation is like so toxified. You know, how do you negotiate that? So I mean, I guess it's just to say there's like utility to disidentification too in moments when either it's a coping strategy and it's like necessary given who you're around. If you're like watching something gay next to your mom and you're like 11 and you're gonna be like, that's really crazy, what's on screen? Or it can be like just a way to negotiate the distance between yourself and the object. Like this, the same thing when like I was encountering like images of top surgery for the first time. It was like there's like a real wrestling there between identification and disidentification.
I wonder, yeah, in mentioning Fun Home, like I wonder if what's toxic about that scene, because what happens in that scene, right, is then the dad is like, he looks at Alison Bechdel and is like, oh, you want to be like her. And it's really that calling out that I see you seeing that other person, I see the representation that you desire and like, I'm going to shame you for it, right? So it's not so much...
It's kind of compulsory disidentification.
Or what's like toxic about it is then that third viewer putting like a moral valence on that identification. I'd be curious to think more about like the way disidentification works in self-portraiture. I've been thinking a lot of like this process of narrativizing or like imaging my own transition and then understanding it via image, and something so much as like choosing to have my breasts taken off is like a very alienating and wild thing to do, and through imaging that both like before and after was a way to sort of bridge that distance or like that decision and cope with it to some degree, and then see like, or seeing others who had done it was a way for me to see a way forward in that. I would say that's therapeutic. I would say stock images maybe not so much.
Do y'all want to answer a fluff question? Like lunch? I don't want to do astrology. Or like pop music. Just talk about it.
You sure you don't
Sorry,
want to
what?
do astrology?
If you want to do astrology, it's not
Seriously?
my bag, but it might be yours, I guess.
Did you say pop music?
That's an easy one. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to Ariana Grande out the wazoo.
Oh,
I also feel like her most recent record is really about like anxiety and PTSD in a way that I've just never seen in top 40 songs. So yeah, I love Breathing, I love Get Well Soon, everything.
Her Billboard speech was just like out of this world, just like she essentially like accepted this award, and she was just like, this is such an amazing moment, but I'm not present in it because of what I'm going on with my life, essentially. And like, I was just like, oh my god, girl, like, yeah, exactly. Just to see like a boxer have like that level of vulnerability, it's like, oh my god, she's one of us, like, it's, yeah. I mean, like, I'll never stop listening to SZA, but you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course. I work at a coffee shop part-time, you cannot get away from it. It's like the only thing that binds us together.
No.
I don't really listen to that much top 40, so I don't know how much input I like to listen. But I do like Ariana Grande.
She's the glue that brings us together.
Yeah. I just love her like definitive, yeah. Like that's been so in my life.
I don't think I would be true to this panel if I didn't say Sophie.
Yeah, of course.
I have to put her name out there.
Yeah.
Pop icon.
Miss this.
Speaking of disidentification, I found out that my most listened to song of 2018, Spotify told me, was Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. That can come out to a lot of people.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was really special.